Bet the Board.
What do you mean you don't bet? I mean, I don't bet. You know, I don't gamble. I don't. I never have, and I never will. Yeah, right. I'll bet you $20 I can get you gambling before the end of the day.
You owe me 15 grand, pal.
Pay him. Pay that man his money.
It's the Bet the Board podcast.
God likes me. He really, really likes me.
In the end, I wound up right back where I started. I could still pick winners, and I could still make money for all kinds of people back home. And why mess up a good thing?
Here's Payne Insider and Todd Furman.
Welcome in to the Bet the Board podcast, powered by FanDuel Sportsbook. It is time, ladies and gentlemen. The preseason pageantry is over. NFL Week 1 so close, we can taste it. I'm your host, Todd Furman, joined as always by my esteemed colleague and co-host, Payne Insider. This is the perfect time to remind all of you bettors of all ability levels, FanDuel.com/BetTheBoard. Go take advantage of the aggressive sign-up bonuses, whether it's the 40-1 promotions available for any NFL Week 1 bet, $1,000 free bets, you name it, it's all right there for you. Want to welcome all those fine folks in Arizona who will have legal sports betting for the first time ever this NFL season. Of course, their local restrictions do apply, so be sure to read all of those on the FanDuel site. Payne, I have to ask, I mean, I know we don't have a full slate of games on a Thursday morning, but for you, it's got to feel a little bit like Christmas Eve every time an NFL season is set to kick off.
Absolutely. It's going to be a great night. Sunday, Week 1, that's like Christmas morning. These lines have been out for a while, but the anxiousness to get the games here and watch them and try to figure out what these teams might be, confirm what we thought coming into the season, and we've done all our work for months. That's always nice to get that confirmation that we were potentially right. Or you have to go back to the drawing board and be like, man, we grossly miscalculated this thing here.
It's always interesting when you look at the board to see how it's been scavenged over, figuring out what numbers have moved. But it's also a credit to odds makers. When you look at some of these opening prices versus where the numbers sit, you're not talking about wild variations like college football totals that'll move 7 to 10 points early on when you try and get an inkling on exactly what these teams are going to be. And I know a lot of our loyal listeners have asked, would John Sheeran be back on the show for season 2? You bet your ass John will be back with us later to share what FanDuel is looking at as far as some of their liabilities in the futures market, division-wise, and of course where John's starting to see a little bit of the sharp money come in for NFL Week 1. But Payne, we have a lot of ground to cover, 5 big games. But before we get there, I mean, I feel we need to kick all of our listeners in the backside and encourage them to tell their friends, their families, their coworkers, their enemies, everyone, get in and sign up for the Bet the Board football free roll.
Over 2,000 entries already, and just because tonight is opening night, that does not matter. You can still sign up. All you do is need your picks in by Sunday, 5 minutes before kickoff. Go to bettheboardcontest.com, sign up, 100% free. Over 6,000 in cash prizes for the season-long winners. We will also have a weekly winner all 18 weeks. bettheboardcontest.com, by far the best free roll NFL sports betting contest in the entire space.
And that's the thing. For all of you guys that are out there listening going, man, if I start slow, it's going to be tough to compete. You can go 0-5 for 17 weeks. All it takes is going 5-0 one week and landing the tiebreaker, and you can walk around like you own the place with some of your very own Bet the Board swag. So it's season-long contest component, and obviously, like Payne mentioned, still plenty of weekly prizes to take advantage. So all it takes is catching a little bit of lady luck on your side to get you to the window. But all right, into the games.
Link is in the description to that contest, by the way. Just click the link in the podcast description. It's right there.
Yep, and we've tweeted it out, but you can find it. I believe it's pinned to our Bet the Board pod Twitter feed, so all the rules and regs right there. So make sure when you enter, you also use your Twitter handle so we can call you out appropriately when you inevitably win those weeks. For those folks new to our Thursday NFL format, we'll preview a couple of the games on Sunday, and we'll close up shop with the Thursday night football game. So if you're listening for a full-scale breakdown of the Cowboys and Bucs, it's coming, just not right now. So Payne, let's head out to Western New York, where it's the Buffalo Bills welcoming in the Pittsburgh Steelers for a 1 o'clock Eastern kickoff. Buffalo, a 6.5 point favorite in this contest. Total sits at 48.5 at FanDuel Sportsbook. And when we look back at the Steelers a season ago, they started out like a house on fire, 11-0 right out of the gates. They did limp to the finish, though, going 1-5, and you saw the defense crater, allowing more than 11 points per game worse, or they were worse, in that 6-game stretch. Meanwhile, Buffalo, the most prolific season this franchise has had in quite some time. First AFC East title since 1995, won their first playoff game since that same season as well, made their first conference title since 1993. And what did that mean? Josh Allen will never have to pay for a beer or a buffalo wing anywhere in the great state of New York. When you look at Allen, 20-3 straight up as a starter, 15-1 straight up the last 16 times he's been installed as a favorite role, but not to be ignored, the Steelers have thrived as an underdog with Big Ben and Mike Tomlin. Payne, when you look at Buffalo's offense, do we expect them to pick up where they left off, or is there a potential regression looming against the Steelers defense that we're not quite sure what to expect?
That's a great question, because I think everyone wants to see, or probably doesn't believe, Buffalo can replicate last year's magic. And there's people doubting Josh Allen still, obviously. More pressure on his shoulders after signing for $258 million. But with Brian Daboll running the show, I just don't see a massive drop-off. I would have liked seeing Buffalo upgrade the O-line a little bit, sure, but I think Gabriel Davis takes that next step. Our listeners know that I am a big fan of Emmanuel Sanders, so that addition's going to be huge. But I've said this for a while. Late last year, in the offseason, in previews, Josh Allen has all the arm talent. He's mobile. It's a perfect combination. Give him credit. But I have spent, just gobs of time telling everyone, like, Brian Daboll is the captain of this yacht. He's responsible for this. He does smart things. He puts his players in the right positions. Everything that we talk about that's about being efficient, Brian Daboll does, right? Pass-heavy team. Pass on first down. I mean, that's what he was fantastic with. That's when Buffalo made a change offensively. Obviously, give Josh Allen credit, but it's like Buffalo became the most pass-heavy team on first down the first 3 quarters. They had the very best pass offense on early downs in the entire league. Play action, which we tell everybody you have to do if you are running an efficient offense. That rate increased last year by 13%. It was the second largest increase in the NFL. Pre-snap motion, right? Help a young quarterback figure out what the defense is doing. Make them show their hand pre-snap. And that's what motion does. That increased 17% year over year. And because of that, Josh Allen's accuracy soared. 14% increase in adjusted accuracy from his rookie season. So that's really interesting to me. And for this game, when you look at Buffalo's offense and Pittsburgh's defense, I don't think either of the units are changing their stripes, right? Buffalo's going to continue to be pass heavy. The Steelers' defensive principles aren't changing. It comes down to execution. I know that's cliche, and obviously there'll be some minor tweaks and adjustments, but for the most part, what you see is what you get. Now, Daboll absolutely has the ability to make the impact adjustments more than Keith Butler. We saw that last year in the Week 14 matchup. Daboll started kind of at halftime dragging Diggs underneath and making Keith Butler cover him with a linebacker, and of course, that's what he chose to do.
Stupid lake effect snow.
That was actually interesting because you had the key adjustment there with some of the route concepts, and then the lake effect finally wore off, and the bad weather subsided about a quarter and a half in. Buffalo goes out in the second half, 8.1 yards per pass, 65% success rate in the second half. And the key here is I look at the Steelers' defense, and to me, we're all, the outside world saying, hey, regression from Buffalo's offense. Sure. I mean, it's not tough to call for that because they're so damn good last year. But it's like, in my mind, I think the unit on the field that might not be able to replicate last year's success is Pittsburgh's defense, right? Most efficient defense in the NFL. Number 1 early down defense. So that'll be a down to watch in this game.
Yeah,
Number 1.
I was going to say legitimate concerns for that Steelers defense. I mean, when you look at some of the personnel that won't be out there, we know that Minkah Fitzpatrick is the human disruptor in terms of what Josh Allen's going to need to identify before every snap, and had nothing but positive things to say about it. But you're right. I mean, you look at the Steelers team, some familiar names won't be in the mix. TJ Watt, let's see what exactly we get from him. I know that contract story, in my opinion, has been a little bit overblown, but clearly these two teams aren't going to look that much different than when we saw them play in the latter portions of last season.
TJ Watt is obviously a guy who loves football, right? I mean, he came back to practice this week. All indications will be that he's out there. It sounds like a deal is imminent. and we'll see what comes of that. But they need him out there, obviously. But this was a unit that was number one in pass rush win rate. And so we know they lost Bud Dupree. You got to have TJ Watt out there or that entire defense changes. And I think that's something to watch and something that we kind of focused on with the Pittsburgh Steelers preview is what is TJ Watt this season? Is there drop-off if there's more focus paid attention to him? Because Bud Dupree was actually fantastic last year. I know he'd kind of always been a little overrated, and the Steelers organization still thought he was, and that's why they let him walk. Obviously, they had some cap issues, and they couldn't sign him, but they always felt like he was a little overrated. But the reality is, like, he was top 5 in disruption rate last year. And when TJ Watt was paired with Bud Dupree, TJ Watt's pressure weight went through the roof. It was 19%. When Bud Dupree wasn't on the field, it dropped to 10%. Now he's not going to be on the field. We know Daboll's probably going to pay extra attention to him, chip him, and so who else can apply that pressure? The other guys that we mentioned in the secondary, Steven Nelson, Mike Hilton, those guys are going to be missed. Salary cap forced those guys to be gone, but, I mean, they were damn good metrically. So I think those are some key losses. Also, I know you read the injury report, and I'm going to butcher the name, Tyson Alualu, right? Hasn't practiced yet this week.
That was pretty good.
That was good.
I'm going to give you credit for that.
Beautiful. Working on my Hawaiian names this offseason. Spent countless hours in the lab doing it.
We're going to send you to Micronesia, Polynesia. You can make a whole stint throughout the West Pacific.
What's going on now is if you actually type in some of these names into the old Google, there is a video button that you can hit, and they just pronounce it for you. So I've been going out of my way to do that, as if I need more time dedicated to prep. So, he's dealing with an elbow injury. Let's monitor that. He is a disruptor in the middle, equally good as a rusher and a run stuffer, graded out Pittsburgh's third best defensive player. So, have to keep tabs. But I think if Dabes is thinking about this correctly, Todd, it's a hot and humid day in Buffalo. It's going to be 80 degrees, about 68% humidity, maybe a little tempo early, keep attacking, let Pittsburgh blitz. Then have Josh kind of quick hit his receivers in the slot when they are being defended by linebackers. And eventually, I think you might see a defense that lacks some depth wear down in the later stages of the game.
I mean, I think if we're looking at this game, it's relatively known commodities from the Buffalo offensive side and the Steelers defensive side. Meanwhile, on the other side, a lot of fresh faces when you're talking about Pittsburgh offensively. The offensive line replacing 4 of 5 in the trenches. New offensive coordinator Matt Canada, who you talked about extensively on our preseason preview podcast. New offensive line coach, new tight end coach, new quarterback coach. And when you look at this Steelers team, I mean, last season, the first 5 games of the year, they ran it nearly 48% of the time. The rest of the season, the run rate dropped to 30%, and you saw the yards per carry fall off a cliff. Now, maybe Najee Harris helps that a little bit, and clearly the Steelers are going to have to be a little bit more balanced. But when you look at Buffalo on the defensive side, this was a team that fell out of the top 10 from a defensive efficiency standpoint. You'd hope the potential return of star Latulele will help. We're not quite sure if he's going to be available. But to the Bills' credit, they're saying all the right things. Micah Hyde embracing the role of being the defensive captain. And by all accounts, this is a team that's very young and inexperienced at the defensive end, but the rave reviews we're hearing about a Gregory Rousseau as a potential pass rushing threat should make this Buffalo defense significantly more dynamic than what we saw for stretches a season ago.
Buffalo will land themselves back in the top 10 this season. No doubt about that. And this is a huge test out of the gate for Matt Canada. And it's probably fair to grade him and the Steelers offense on a little bit of a curve, because you also have the factor of going into Buffalo, where, the Bills Mafia hasn't been for a meaningful game since December 2019. So that place is going to be just rowdy. And then you factor that in against a defense that, again, we're projecting, it feels like a defense that's in that like 4 to 7 range. But I'm just interested to see what the process looks like. Let's see if there is this shift in offensive philosophy. And let's see if these principles lead to a little bit more efficiency. Let's see if Pittsburgh's a little bit more multidimensional. You kind of hit on this with some of the numbers you listed at the top, that they've been quite predictable. And it's really impossible to be more predictable than Randy Fichtner was last year. I mean, Steelers basically just lived in 3 wide sets, right? 74% of snaps, they were in 3 wide, and, Big Ben was in shotgun, and they threw from it 72% of the time. It was either that, or it was a predictable, down and distance run, or it was a short pass. Fichtner wouldn't use pre-snap motion. He wouldn't use play action at a high enough rate. This season with Canada, I think there's at least some hope in the offense being a little bit more complex, and the receivers are going to move around and be a little bit more interchangeable. There's going to be way more pre-snap motion. That's kind of Matt Canada's calling card. And if that comes to fruition here, I think what's really interesting, I went down like another wormhole, and I was just looking at motion rates. Buffalo actually struggled against that a little bit last year. When you look at some of the teams that used pre-snap motion at the highest rates, the Rams in week 3 with McVay. We know he loves him some pre-snap motion. Rams put up nearly 500 yards of offense, 7.3 yards of play, 62% success rate. Andy Reid, gobs of pre-snap motion. Even in the monsoon, KC went into Buffalo, 6.4 yards per play, 63% success rate, 466 total yards. And then you're like, oh, well, those are really good offenses, really good offensive minds. Nick Mullins, week 13, when San Francisco was kicked out of their home and were playing a fake home game in Arizona. Obviously, Kyle Shanahan's brilliant, but managed over 400 yards of offense, 6.7 yards per play, and a 53% success rate. So motion has given Buffalo's defense a little trouble. Now, I'm not sure that the Steelers' parts offensively are great. I've kind of hinted at this. You have an average quarterback, a below-average O-line, and maybe 3 to 4 guys that are plus talents on that side of the ball. But I'm interested to see what Matt Canada can do here. I know he's hoping for improved O-line play. Pittsburgh obviously went younger, as you pointed out there, along the O-line. 4 of new starters along that unit. You add Najee Harris. All indications are he's going to be a home run. But you have an O-line that was 32nd, dead last in line yards last year, 24th in run block win rate. The center that's projected to start dealing with a little bit of an injury. Let's see if he can get out there and start this week. But when you look at the matchup, that is an area where Buffalo's traditionally been a little bit susceptible, partly because they have some holes on the interior of the defensive line, and partly by scheme, right? They're okay with you running the ball inefficiently, but Pittsburgh does need to be a little bit better, a little bit more multidimensional. They got to get that run game going. So that'll be an interesting factor in this one.
Last thing on this game, Payne, when you look at the numbers, last year when these two teams played, we saw the total the exact same, 48.5, but you saw the point spread. Buffalo closed about a 1.5, 2-point chalk, depending on the shop. Now we've seen this number balloon well past that. Obviously, you make adjustments given the Steelers' current form and a lot of the changing personnel. Are you surprised to see this number open as high as it did, or given where we think Buffalo is going to be on the ascent and Pittsburgh's trajectory headed in the other direction, this is a fair and accurate assessment of what these two teams are, at least going into week 1?
It's really interesting because there's a lot of unknowns, obviously, in week 1. And a lot of it's based on opinion and projections, although both well-researched. This total has had some movement, okay? Initially, there was some under money when it was in the low 50s and it was around key numbers. Got down to 48. We saw some over money come in. Then the same group that went under initially said, hey, 49 is still a good number. I'm going to come back in under. And so this is where you're at right now, 48.3, let's call it. And it is interesting because it is around that similar number as last year. And I'll be candid, in week 14, we went over the total. We lost because suddenly the random lake effect occurred and the first quarter and a half was just nothing, right? Just a big bagel. Neither of the teams could do much with the lake effect coming in. Receivers were dropping balls. But after that point, both of the offenses were able to move the ball a little bit. And so my feeling is you're going to see a lot of the concepts from the second half of the game where Buffalo is able to move the ball efficiently through the air, implemented from the onset here. So that'll be interesting to see. I'm not going to partake in the battle, right? It's a long season. There's an extra week to bet as well. Like, you guys go have fun. I'll figure out where else I can invest my money rather than watch you two kind of have a pissing match. So that's where I'm at on this total. But it is one that is interesting because I do think Pittsburgh's defense regresses a little bit. The offense with Matt Canada in motion has given Buffalo some trouble in the past, and I think Buffalo's offense isn't going to have this precipitous drop that everyone's kind of calling for.
Should be an interesting game for sure. We know Buffalo's eyes on the prize to repeat as division champs. Pittsburgh just trying to get back to the postseason. When we head to the nation's capital, it's the Washington football team welcoming in the Los Angeles Chargers. And when you look at this number, it's interesting because there are a variety of prices out there. FanDuel currently sitting at pick'em for this contest. Total in the game, 44.5. When you look at Justin Herbert, we all know about his record-breaking season last year. 31 touchdown passes, the most ever for a rookie. But in comes Ryan Fitzpatrick, that grizzled veteran for the Washington football team. When you look at Fitzy, the last 18 games he started, he's helped line people's pockets to the tune of a 13-5 against the spread record. And interestingly enough, it's one thing that we've talked about for years on this podcast, Payne. This is a Chargers team who you actually discount when they play in their own building, and the markets don't lie. They're 11-20-1 the last 32 games they've played in their own building. Over that same stretch, 19-10-3 against the spread on the road. Washington thrived as an underdog, although that's probably not something that's going to come into play here. But when you look at the Chargers, hey, new coaching staff coming in, a lot of reason for optimism. You'd have to think somewhere along the way, all of those 23 one-score games they played over the last two seasons, 7-16 straight up is a record that can regress a little bit. But the biggest storyline here is the Chargers could be down one of their top weapons for week one.
That's the side of the ball that makes the most sense to start because I think it's an interesting handicap. There is just more unknowns right now with the Chargers offense, right? How does Justin Herbert handle making his first NFL road start with fans in the stands? That is going to be an adjustment that probably needs to be made not just here, but other places as well in week one and maybe throughout the season. What are we even expecting schematically from Joe Lombardi's offense that we've barely seen? And the last time we saw it was 2015. How does Washington prepare for that? Clearly, there's going to be things Washington hasn't been able to prepare for that they're going to see here. You also have Herbert handling a brand new system without taking a single preseason snap.
So bizarre to me. So bizarre, and I want to go on record here because if he struggles, I don't want to play Monday morning quarterback. And if he goes out there and throws for 350 yards against this defense, I'll eat crow. But let me just say it's so bizarre from a decision-making standpoint.
Yeah, and it's interesting from that standpoint. Obviously, Brandon Staley is from the school of Sean McVay, and McVay does not play his starters, and his offenses hum out of the gates. So that's kind of his mentor at this point on the offensive side of things. But by all accounts, like this is a pretty nuanced system as well that Joe Lombardi wants to run. The reason Chase Daniel was brought in this offseason was to help teach Herbert the system because he spent time with Lombardi in Detroit. He spent time with Lombardi in New Orleans. The LA Times actually wrote an interesting article about this yesterday, and Chase Daniel was quoted as saying, "It's a lot of work for the quarterback. You literally have to know every single bit of everything." And effectively, my understanding is how this is going to be run is Herbert's going to have a menu of play options at the line of scrimmage, and within that menu, Herbert's going to decide based upon the look defensively of what they're going to actually run.
I hope it's not like the Cheesecake Factory menu because that could be overwhelming when you only have 30 seconds between plays.
The Cheesecake menu continues to get larger.
Yeah, there's more ads in that thing. I mean, it's incredible. The amount of advertising revenue they make in those things is beyond my scope of comprehension.
This is not something positive to say out loud, but I know this is a safe space among all our loyal listeners. I think I've completed 3 books in my adult life, right? I mean, I breezed through the Goosebumps series as a kid, but I would say
that's a lie. I'm going under 3.
I would say that menu is probably the second longest book that I have read. And so, yeah, the lot of options there. Okay, let's get back on track here a little bit. I think what is interesting about this is, you had Drew Brees decide to be a good guy and reached out to Herbert this offseason to lend a hand. All the reports are that Herbert's like super smart. He's a grinder, right? Like spends just countless hours in the building. There's also been a lot of buzz about Joe Lombardi wanting to go up tempo this year. Yet the data we have on him from his 2 years in Detroit didn't signal a guy that really wanted to go fast. He was 22nd and 30th in neutral game pace. So let's see if that's different. But, maybe there's some change here. You would think Lombardi says to himself, hey, my Lions offense in 2015, it was the 13th most efficient. I had 2 receivers go over 1,000 yards. And why am I going to completely deviate from that rare success for a Detroit offense? And so that'll be the interesting thing here because it just sounds like It's going to be completely different from the potential data points we've had, 6 years ago. Now, we do have a data point from 2014, which is interesting. Lombardi's Lions offense played Ron Rivera's Panthers defense. Stafford was not good that day, was not efficient. 55 QBR, took 4 sacks. Running backs were held to 3.6 a carry and just one explosive. Ron Rivera held Lombardi's offense to 7 points. It's a one-game sample 6-7 years ago. Probably not too much that you can take away from that, but I did want to kind of point that out there. On the matchup side / injury front, you mentioned Austin Eckler. Missed another practice with the nagging hamstring injury. This is the one that took him out last year. And reading between the lines, it doesn't sound overly great. And aside from that, like one of Eckler's best traits is as a pass catcher out of the backfield. In year 1 of Ron Rivera's defensive system, Washington was top 5 in both receptions and yards allowed to running backs. Then you have the right tackle, Brian Bulaga, dealing with a hip flexor injury. Did return to practice on Monday. He's been taking things pretty lightly. Let's monitor that. It would be a big loss, obviously, if he doesn't play or at some point has to be removed from the game, because Washington's defense, 3rd in pass rush win rate, 9th in pressure rate. If Bulaga's out or can't finish, that changes everything. We have seen in the past, right, going back to college football, I know you love this, the first-round pick, Rashawn Slater, he's like the only guy in college football that could actually make Chase Young look like a normal human when Ohio State and Northwestern played each other. So suddenly, if Bulaga isn't a go, you can move Chase Young around and find him a better matchup on the other side. So these are some of the reasons that we've seen some pro money start to enter the market here in Washington this week.
It's interesting, too, because obviously we know there's a high level of optimism around Justin Herbert. You talked about the LA Times covering that story, and Keenan Allen saying that Justin Herbert has no ceiling. Strong praise from a veteran receiver. But at the same time, you do wonder about the weapons that the Chargers have to attack that Washington football defense. Meanwhile, on the other side of the ball, all the talk with this Chargers team is how talented this roster was for the last couple of seasons. And they kind of bottomed out last year, gave up more than 26 points per game. They were 23rd in the NFL in that department, 20th in defensive efficiency. Now, I know in comes a defensive-minded head coach who spearheaded the Rams, world-beater defense last year. Personnel not quite the same, but getting Derwin James back should help. Chris Harris, the savvy veteran, and strong praise again for another rookie in Asante Samuel in terms of what he can contribute. Joey Bosa back in the fold. But this is a Washington team who, in my opinion, Payne, gets a massive upgrade at quarterback in Ryan Fitzpatrick, not necessarily as a clubhouse leader or a game manager, but a guy who can actually stretch the field and take advantage of some of the underrated weapons that Washington has on the offensive side.
Yes, I agree to an extent, but for me, there's still some uncertainty on this side as well. And Fitzpatrick, no doubt, massive upgrade for Washington. And I think the question becomes, how large is the upgrade? And that's what's going to lead us to some of potentially the projection inaccuracies as a better, because what does he look like? Is it the guy that performed last year at a top 5 rate overall, but the reason he was top 5 last year in a lot of metrics is because he had an anomaly season under pressure, which typically isn't replicated. But when you're talking about replacing a Dwayne Haskins or an Alex Smith in terms of value over average, Haskins was the worst quarterback in the NFL, and Alex Smith was the second worst. So this is a massive upgrade, even if Ryan Fitzpatrick is average to slightly below average. Now, I mentioned this in the preview podcast in the NFC East, but it's interesting to me because I'm a fan of human nature stuff, and everyone loves Ryan Fitzpatrick. Impossible not to like him. And he is an upgrade for Washington, but probably the FedEx driver who dropped off your cash after first winning week in college football was an upgrade over the quarterbacks that Washington had last week. Last year. When I look at this, and it's just there's a reason Ryan Fitzpatrick's played for 9 different teams, right?
NFL record, by the way.
Forget that. Yeah. And, when we have seen him have some of his success, aside from an early season start in Tampa where he was absolutely on fire, it is much easier to play any sport across the board, not just football, and quarterback in this instance, if your team doesn't have aspirations or large goals, right? When you're coming off the bench as a relief pitcher and your team's behind, you can play fast and free, because if you pull off the upset, you're the cock of the walk. You come up short, no biggie, right? Wasn't your fault we got behind a couple scores. So that's the difference in this mentality, because now you're QB1. with a team that has high expectations. You won the division last year, and now everyone's saying, hey, we got to take the next step. And you have one of the league's best defenses. So from the quarterback position, you have a gunslinger, but the reality is you probably need somebody that just isn't going to hinder the defense. I'm all about pushing the ball downfield. You need to do that. You need to open up the offense a little bit, and offense correlates to winning far more than defense. But you also don't want a guy that's been known to throw a bunch of picks and put your defense in poor positions. The other thing that I'm unsure in this matchup is Brandon Staley. And obviously all the signs point to Staley being fantastic, right? All the information I have is that he is one of the up-and-coming innovators. In saying that, I think it's still fair to call him a one-year wonder at this point, Todd?
Oh, I think it's more than fair when you look at his career trajectory, and we talked about it in previewing the NFC West. I'm not going to disparage the guy, but it's not a resume that it's exactly loaded with big league experience to warrant having this kind of job with this kind of maybe generational talent at the quarterback position.
Yeah, I mean, he was able last year to coach Aaron Donald and Jalen Ramsey, best two players at their position. And he also got to face a shit schedule of offenses and quarterbacks on his way to landing this job. I mean, the schedule was a bottom 8 schedule in overall efficiency, passing efficiency, pass blocking efficiency, third down efficiency. The quarterbacks we've discussed, like Wentz, Daniel Jones, Alex Smith, Kyle Allen, Foles, Nick Mullins, Cam, who is unemployed, Darnold, 2 in the first career start. Let's see what this looks like this season. I'm not ready to just go out there and anoint him Bill Belichick yet. I'm also not sure what Scott Turner is as an OC. If you watch what he does, he feels like he's on the cusp of some good things, of being great. Tries to do a lot of the right things with motion and play action and passing on first down and passing to running backs, but he hasn't put it all together yet. Curtis Samuel, you mentioned, one of the larger weapons that was brought in this offseason that Washington felt like, hey, this is going to be a quick fix for wide receiver 2, and he's also got familiarity with Ron and Scott from Carolina. He's not going to play this week. So the focus is turned back on Terry McLaurin again. Now, Staley did a pretty good job last year removing number 1 receivers, but also Terry McLaurin did very well with horrific quarterbacks. So that'll be something to watch and monitor here. If Brandon Staley goes to his usage of light boxes and plays with an extra defensive back on the field, which he assuredly will probably do here. Washington's O-line was dominant in run block win rate last year, finished 3rd. Antonio Gibson, running behind that line, needs to dominate. I think there's an advantage there for Washington. The other matchup in this game, which could be a little bit more difficult for Washington's offense, is Logan Thomas, bless you, versus Derwin James. And Logan Thomas obviously has been all the buzz this offseason. He's had continued growth with the position change, and now he has a quarterback that can get him the ball. Apparently, Ryan Fitzpatrick and Logan Thomas are in sync, just vibing out this entire offseason. That's his go-to guy, even though you have Terry McLaurin. But Derwin James is an absolute freak. Very versatile. It's probably a piece that Brandon Staley can play in the slot, so he helps in the box against the run, but he's also shown an ability to be elite in coverage and remove tight ends. So I think that might be the game within the game that ultimately decides the game. So something to watch there as well.
Should be one hell of a football game. 2 teams that have big aspirations coming into the season. One of them will get off on the right foot. The other will have things tempered at least a little bit. And when you look at Washington's upcoming schedule, they can't afford to let any games get away, although they do have the interesting distinction of playing the Giants on a short week on Thursday and then not seeing another divisional opponent on their schedule until the calendar flips to December. So from 2 appetizers in the early portion of the day to the main course in the afternoon, and no doubt the best game of the weekend, in my opinion, the Kansas City Chiefs will welcome in the Cleveland Browns in a rematch of last year's divisional playoff. You're looking at Kansas City, a 6-point favorite at FanDuel Sportsbook. This total, 54.5. It's hovered between those 2 numbers. Kansas City in that contest finished with a net yard per play advantage of plus 1.9. They were able to hold the Browns' passing attack in check. They did give up 5 yards per carry, but at the same time, hey, look, the bottom line is they led that game box to wire. When you look at this Cleveland Browns team, they have a dubious distinction working against them week 1. The last 16 season openers, 0-15-1. Meanwhile, on the other side, Patrick Mahomes, your beloved Patrick Mahomes, I should say, Payne, 10-0 in his career during the month of September, but maybe most impressively, never thrown an interception in this calendar month. When you look at
Yeesh.
Yeah, I mean, some of these numbers are staggering, and we can get into Mahomes a little bit. The Chiefs, though, a season ago, had 7 wins without covering, the most by a team since the San Francisco 49ers accomplished the feat in 1990. When you look at this game, Payne, we know the headliners probably are the Kansas City offense against the Myles Garrett-led Browns stop unit, but on the other side of the ball, you're looking at Baker Mayfield matched up against a Kansas City defense that probably doesn't get enough credit for how well they've played in stretches over the last couple seasons.
They definitely have performed better than people think, although they did have a little bit of a drop-off in year 2 with Spags. But when I look at the Browns' offense, it feels like they are built to give the Chiefs trouble, right? Cleveland's bread and butter is what the Chiefs have struggled with defensively over the last few years. Mostly everything for Cleveland is built off the ground game or making something look like run, right? Disguising things. That's what Stefanski's great at. But when you have the second most expensive offensive line in the NFL and Cleveland plans to maul you up front, it doesn't feel like a good matchup when Kansas City's defense is 26th in run-stop win rate last year, 24th in line yards, 31st in overall defensive run efficiency. And I get that it's 2021, but for the Browns, they have to be able to run the ball. That is how the system's built. Now, Kansas City, I noticed, is going a little bit heavier along the D-line. We kind of said, hey, watch out for this in their season preview. They're going to go with their best 4. Chris Jones, if you looked at the depth chart, is listed as a defensive end. And then you have some inside guys that, Jaron Reed, Derek Nandi that they're pairing, and then you have Frank Clark on the other end. This does create more bulk, but when you look at the metrics and what these players are, like Jaron Reed obviously adds more bulk, but a little bit better in terms of getting pressure than he is as a run stopper. Finished outside the top 40 in run stop rate back-to-back years. Frank Clark hasn't consistently set an edge ever, really. So, on paper, big edge for Cleveland in the ground game unless the adjustment along the D-line just improves things and Spags can get Chris Jones to be, a willing edge setter and Frank Clark to care about stopping the run. We'll see if that happens. When it comes off with heavy personnel, the ground game has been fantastic, right? And then all of a sudden you see Stefanski say, like, we're going to use this heavy personnel to disguise things, and we're going to throw some play action off of that. That's where Baker does his best work, right? Throw with play action. 29% of his dropbacks last year were with play action. I wouldn't mind seeing that rate creep into the low 30s. His yards per attempt, a full 2.5 yards higher versus non-play action throws. Passer rating is up 33 points with play action. Adjusted completion percentage was higher. Turnover-worthy throws decreased, all with play action. So I think that's the key here. And when you dig into the Chiefs a little bit, they struggled the back half of last year against play action. They were horrific defending it. They were bad from 2 tight end sets defending it, and they were bad just in general, and that is what the Browns do. Against play-action pass last year, the second half of the regular season, Chiefs gave 8.3 yards per pass attempt and a positive .22 EPA. And then against play-action passes from 2 tight end sets, somehow that number got even worse. Surrendered 11.2 yards per attempt and a positive EPA of .45. So that is something to look for. Cleveland has obviously been all business this offseason. The focus has been on Kansas City. It's the team that bumped them from the playoffs. They felt like they could have won last year, and they were shorthanded. It was the first year in Kevin Stefanski's system in a shortened offseason. You had your starting left tackle, Jedrick Wills, went down on the first drive of the game. His replacement, Kendall Lamb, injured his elbow, and before you know it, Cleveland's playing their 3rd string left tackle in the most important game. OBJ didn't play. Donovan Peoples-Jones, who has apparently been surging this fall, he could be a little bit more of a threat this year. You also have a key cog out for Kansas City. Willie Gay is injured once again. Okay. Feels
that
like he's
pesky
been injured
toe, my friend. That pesky toe.
The pesky toe. That pesky toe. He is really the only linebacker on this roster that has the ability to go sideline to sideline with speed. Ben Neiman's going to be his replacement. Below average linebacker. Gave up almost 12 yards of reception and allowed a 122 passer rating in coverage. So I think there's plenty of advantages here for Cleveland's offense, Todd.
You know, what I liked most about Cleveland coming into this season, we know about them upgrading their overall talent level on the roster, but the players were saying the right things. And one of the lines that really resonated with me that I'd read in multiple spots was talking about calm within the chaos. and just kind of taking a franchise known for being all over the place, providing an identity as much as anything else. And the other thing that came out about this game, normally if you probably talked to Baker Mayfield 3 years ago, it would be about revenge and getting the best of Kansas City. But all the players have talked about focus, realizing, hey, look, there are 31 teams that are disappointed after every NFL season. Their season ended no differently theoretically than the Kansas City Chiefs. And this is a chance for them to kind of start something special, knowing that there are such high expectations. Now, if Cleveland's going to be successful, we know about the offense and what Kevin Stefanski wants to establish there, but they're also going to need a secondary to step up that was extremely beat up a year ago. And when you look at the names and talent in that defensive backfield, John Johnson, Troy Hill, Greg Newsome, Richard LeCount, Grant Delpit, Greedy Williams, Denzel Ward. This is really a who's who of guys that are out there. But the biggest question, Payne, can they gel as a unit? Can they stay healthy? And can they do anything to neutralize a white-hot Patrick Mahomes, especially when it comes to early season starts?
I think it's really interesting because we've seen this reshaping of the Browns defense, and it is specifically to defend offenses like the Chiefs and the Bills, two teams that they're going to have to go through to make a Super Bowl run. And you mentioned the area of improvement. It's the back end. They add 3 new starters. They spend a first-day pick on Newsome. He is going to be a day one starter. They add Troy Hill. They add John Johnson from the Rams. Hill was a beast last year defending the slot. 1.03 yards per coverage snap allowed. That was 5th best among corners with at least 200 snaps in the slot. John Johnson graded out the 5th best cover safety. And what's crazy, as you alluded to this, is you have Greedy Williams and Grant Delpit, 2 guys taken inside the first 46 picks as depth guys that aren't even starting. And so then you go out in the draft also. You get J.O.K. He was brought in to fill a void as a coverage linebacker. Tough task out of the gate here, but he was drafted to defend a guy like Travis Kelce. He was one of the best cover linebackers his final year at Notre Dame. I've raved about Joe Woods as defensive coordinator. And that's what's interesting in this game because his specialty is working with defensive backs. And even though he had the most injured secondary by a long mile last year, his scheme was so good, he removed number 1 receivers from the game. The Browns were the 4th best team in the league, negating opposing teams' number 1. Now, I know Tyreek Hill's a little bit of a different animal, but something to think about here. Where the Browns were susceptible was to the ancillary receivers because they had no depth. That's different now. And, you start to look at things and, you don't want to be too obvious here. And obviously in 2021, it's important to cover. But why it's so important to cover in a matchup like this is like Patrick Mahomes. You riddled off the stats, but your guys in the secondary have to cover for longer stretches because you can't blitz Mahomes. You got to hope you get natural pressure. You cannot blitz the guy. He will end your life if you blitz him. 69% completions last year, 10 yards an attempt, 17 touchdowns, 0 picks, 141 passer rating against the blitz. So you need one of 2 things. It's natural pressure or cover corners that can stick on their man for longer extended stretches. And the hope is that's what Cleveland has right now. You also have Myles Garrett paired with Jadeveon Clowney, who's dealing with the flu this week. Sounds like he's going to play, but might not be able to have his normal snap amount. The hope is that those 2 guys can bring some natural pressure. Joe Woods has talked about moving those guys around a little bit to disguise some things. You add some cheaper resources along the D-line with Malik Jackson in the interior. You got Tack McKinley on the outside. Maybe they can assist a little bit. But knowing that you might not be able to blitz too often, I think Joe Woods is going to probably come up with some stunts up front. You have a rebuilt Chiefs offensive line, no doubt. I think this was the right move. I think you got more talent and you got younger. So that is 2 great things, right? You got an O-line now that can build with Patrick Mahomes along the way. But let's not forget this. First game, O-line includes a rookie center and rookie right guard, along with a second-year right tackle. So there is some youth there that may take some, time gaining some cohesiveness and acclimating to, games at this large of a stage. But I'm dying to see this matchup through the air because, Todd, I've sent you some texts about not being happy with the Chiefs' weapons. We know what Tyreek Hill is. Mecole Hardman obviously taking on an expanded role. We expect a boom, but, still some question marks there. There isn't like a no doubt about it. Mecole is going to be a solidified number 2. I don't love the outside receivers opposite Tyreek. Like Byron Pringle and Demarcus Robinson. I am stunned. Brett Veach didn't call it Miami. and move one of their backup linemen for Preston Williams, or maybe even try to go one step further with an upgrade in Devontae Parker. They don't have that big body receiver that can run that, 18-yard post and just box out and body a defender. They don't have that guy inside the red zone where you can just go have a jump ball and see if a guy can make a contested catch. I hope they go out and get a big receiver opposite Tyreek Hill, because Demarcus Robinson looks good getting off the bus. I don't think the elevator goes up very high. Byron Pringle, fantastic, right? Like the complete opposite of Demarcus Robinson. He's a worker. He is, a film guy. I just don't know if the talent's there. They need another weapon.
Going to be interesting. I mean, this is a team who, of course, sees itself as Super Bowl or bust, and you can understand why when you look at some of the numbers that Mahomes has compiled during his short time as an NFL starting quarterback. Most wins, 38 through 46 regular season starts in NFL history, won 10 straight regular season games. He's won 20 out of the last 21, 44 wins through 54 starts. I mean, every box that you'd want a quarterback to check, this guy does. But you bring up an interesting point, trying to figure out what those weapons will look like in terms of depth outside of Travis Kelce, Tyreek Hill, and, to a lesser extent, Clyde Edwards-Helaire. So this game will go a long way in determining if the Browns are a force to be reckoned with and they can start the season with a victory, or if we're talking about the same old Kansas City Chiefs. 3 big games during the day, Payne, and unfortunately, in my opinion, and for all those Bears fans out there, this not exactly the game that we all are running to see come Sunday night, a little bit anticlimactic to cap off a big day of football. The Bears will take on the Rams for what feels like the 47th season in a row. It's the Rams, a 7.5-point home favorite at FanDuel Sportsbook. Total in this game sits at 46.5. When you look back a season ago, the Rams finished the campaign 12-4 under the total. This is a Rams team that's 4-0 straight up and against the number in week 1 under Sean McVay. And when you look at the way the Rams played at home, they actually became the first team since the Buffalo Bills back in 2003 to play all 8 of their home games under the total. The Rams have been outstanding in primetime for the most part. This, when you look at being the 4th meeting between the Bears and Rams, well, offense has not exactly been the storyline. Under's gone 3-0, an average of 26.3 points per game. Of course, Payne, the biggest storyline for the Chicago Bears is who they're starting at quarterback at least week 1. Bill Lazor, Matt Nagy singing the praises of Andy Dalton's maturity, the way he's led this team through practice, and maybe a silver lining for the Chicago Bears. They did face a Raheem Morris defense last year and were able to erase a late deficit when the Bears had a comeback against the Atlanta Falcons.
I'm looking for more than a mature quarterback. I'm looking for one that actually has some talent. And I'm not sure Andy Dalton is that guy at this point in his career. And we know Matt Nagy, with his ass on the line, has taken back play calling duties. And I'm not sure that's a recipe for success. I mean, when is this guy shown anything on his own merits? He just hasn't. I mean, his offenses have gotten worse and worse as the seasons progress. And so I don't really have high hopes for Chicago's offense. Maybe that changes. The O-line continues to be a little bit of a train wreck. I don't see this working out very well for the Chicago Bears offense here. I just don't think Nagy's the guy to lead an offense. I thought he should have handed off play calling duties to Bill Lazor. He did that last year, but really didn't allow Bill to do some of the things that he wanted to do. But, I mean, this is year 4 for Nagy. And I don't know if Dalton's going to be the guy the full season. He is going to have to hit the lotto here, I think, with Justin Fields to retain his job. And I just don't see that being the case. And you have Andy Dalton that you're trotting out there, and I get it. You're on the road. It's going to be a hostile environment. We want to go with the veteran over the young kid with more talent and an attribute that Andy Dalton does not have with his mobility. But I just don't. What are you getting with Dalton? I mean, it's just a very bad combination of OC, play caller, and quarterback. I mean, I just don't get it. 34-year-old quarterback, right? I mean, there's a reason the Bengals organization said, hey, see ya. Produced at a rate last year 17% below an average quarterback. So I don't see a situation where Andy Dalton's doing much here. In saying that, though, and we've talked about this, and a lot of times, we say some of the same things when we get to week 1 because we've already done the previews on both of these teams, but I do expect the Rams defense to probably regress. I don't know if the system will be as good. We know the schedule past Chicago gets a little bit more difficult. You did lose some pieces in the secondary due to cap casualties. So that's the interesting component about this game and before we shift to the other side, but in general here, this total just going absolutely bonkers both ways, right? Initially, I thought under would be the side here. We saw some under money. Then 44, a key number hit, and we've just seen gobs and waves of over money. We're out to 47, and I can see it from the perspective of Todd. We think the Rams defense is going to regress. We think the Bears defense is going to regress. So you have two defenses trending in the same direction. It would make sense, but I don't know what we're going to get from the Bears offense. And I'm not sure if the Bears offense is going to be good enough to push the Rams offense, which is obviously a little bit more explosive this year.
It's so bizarre because you mentioned the total and the level of familiarity, which is rare for teams outside the division. And it's not like we're talking about Peyton Manning against Tom Brady with their annual showdowns. I mean, the Bears and Rams, you didn't figure were going to be teams to do battle in 4 straight seasons. But alas, here we are with some level of knowing what the opponent wants to do, especially when you factor in the other side of the ball where Matthew Stafford will make his Rams debut. And when you look at what Stafford's been able to accomplish, only 5 quarterbacks, or I should say, 5 quarterbacks have more wins versus the Chicago Bears franchise since 1950, and it's an illustrious list of Brett Favre, Aaron Rodgers, Bart Starr, Fran Tarkenton, and Johnny Unitas. Of course, Matthew Stafford was never surrounded by the most competent organization, and that might be a bit of an understatement during his time in Detroit. I mean, this is a guy last year who faced the Bears with a Lions team that was declining, threw for 400-plus yards, 3 touchdowns, 1 pick, led his team to an outright victory as a 3-point underdog. Payne, I think everyone assuming that it's an automatic upgrade right out of the gates with Matthew Stafford. We know over time him and Sean McVay will be on the same page, but is it fair to expect Stafford to hit the ground running? Again, much like the Chargers didn't take any reps with the first teamers in live preseason action. We do know about all the stage practices and everything else, though, these coaches employ to get their players ready for an upcoming season.
I have to tell you, Fran Tarkenton woke up this morning not knowing he was going to get a shout out and bet the board.
You know, sometimes you have to respect the greats that came before us, all right, Payne? And, you know, eventually down the road, when you ride off into the sunset with your, 8-figure settlement once Bet the Board gets sold to a larger entity, you're going to hope that people mention your name on sports betting podcasts as far as NFL analytics are concerned.
I appreciate the coaching up hours away from a major announcement. Listen.
The major announcement, by the way, spoiler alert, is not an 8-figure payday coming for Bet the Board. So I want to let those listeners know so they're not disappointed.
Yes. You mentioned the process of Stafford getting acclimated to a new offense. We know McVay's way. He doesn't want to play his starters. He said if he had his druthers starters, he'll never play another starter again, and that preseason game should go poof. And we haven't seen that hinder his offenses out of the gates. They come out flying. And I've kind of mentioned this, is that camp and some of the practices are quite rigorous. He puts his guys through gauntlets on the offensive side to the point where that kind of is their seasoning. Those are their preseason games with internal scrimmages. But there could be some amount of time where it takes Stafford to get acclimated. But when we kind of pair these two together, I think it's the perfect fit. And the one thing that's been lacking from McVay's offense is that quarterback that can stretch a defense, that can threaten them, that can make them say, hey, we're not going to be able to just load the box here against this outside zone run system. And that's what's going to be important, and that'll be interesting to see what that impact has on the Rams offense overall. Because we know Goff at this point, boy, we've read some of those reports out of Detroit, not a good fall for him. It's just been terrible camp. But the one differentiator between Goff and Stafford is Stafford's ability to stretch the ball down the field. I mean, Goff last year was captain dink and dunk. 45% of his passing yards only came through the air. The rest was receivers doing dirty work after the catch. Stafford, completely different. His completed air yards were more than Goff's intended air yards per attempt. And so that's a really big factor here. I do think Stafford has an ability to open things up. And when we did our preview on the Chicago Bears, the question we had was in the secondary. So that'll be an interesting matchup to watch is, does Stafford push the ball down the field a little bit more? Does he threaten the part of the Bears defense that's a little susceptible? And so that'll be the interesting thing here. Deshaun Jackson is going to be kind of that home run threat that the Rams really haven't had downfield. Obviously, we know Woods is great and Kupp is fantastic and Higbee's great over the middle, but they've never had that deep threat. Now, he's not going to play a ton of snaps, I don't think, unless someone goes down with injury. But he is going to be that changeup. He's going to be that 100-mile-an-hour fastball that gives the Rams a little bit different of a look here. And what's interesting is, Todd, we're looking at this game, right? Sunday Night Football. It's all about the public being on the favorite in this game. I'm sure John is going to be rooting for the dog here. But to this point, there's been legitimate pro money on the Rams here. And it's one of the larger teaser legs of the week from pro bettors. There is just not a lot of faith in Andy Dalton, Matt Nagy, and a defense that's probably going to regress just a touch.
Anybody who watched this game last year, and I know the Bears have a different starting quarterback, saw how outmatched they were in terms of their skill position talent. The other thing that I believe is worth mentioning here, you talked a little bit about Brandon Staley and how great a job he did with the Rams last year, kind of slowing down number one receivers. Well, for the Rams this season, last I checked, they still have a guy in Jalen Ramsey. So if Ramsey's able to lock down Allen Robinson, do the Bears have any other players that really scare you on the offensive side? David Montgomery going to struggle to run into that defensive front. And I don't think Darnell Mooney and Cole Kmet are the kind of players at this point in their career that are going to keep opposing defensive coordinators up at night before a contest.
That's the hope, is that those two emerge. And they need big second-year leaps. There's been a lot of buzz about Mooney taking that step. They think he is a bona fide deep threat, and they have high hopes for him this season. But those two guys are going to need to take this offense to the next level. The offensive line here is the problem as well. I mean, the Bears' offensive line somehow appears on paper worse than it was a season ago. And you went out and you thought you drafted your day one left tackle. And boy, did those plans get soiled. And if you've watched some of these preseason games, doesn't matter if it's the starting unit, doesn't matter if it's the backups, opposing defensive lines and front sevens are just swarming the Bears quarterbacks. And so that's going to be an interesting matchup within this game. Is now we're talking about Andy Dalton, who we don't think is a great quarterback, but now is likely to be under pressure as well.
Yeah, definitely a team that Bears watching. I know when you look at the Bears win total that we talked about, 7.5, folks thinking they could get to 8 and 9. Hey, look, maybe they catch lightning in a bottle with Justin Fields. I don't think it's the kind of contest that they're able to go on the road and win week one against the Rams side, breaking in a fresh face at quarterback. But you guys have heard enough from the two of us. We do have one game left to go, but in order to break up a little bit of the rhythm here, it's time to welcome in a fresh perspective on things. He joined us every Thursday throughout the fall. We can say he's either smart enough or dumb enough to come back and get himself back into the mix. But more importantly, you can follow John on Twitter at Sheeran, SHEERAN1981 on Twitter. And John, we thought after last season there was potential that we might have scared you off. So the fact that you were willing and able to join us back in the fold here at Bet the Board, we're lucky to have you and looking forward to another great football season.
Yeah, I did fight pretty hard, Todd, to get away, but I wasn't allowed, unfortunately. So here I am back again, looking forward to this season, though.
Honestly,
John, I tried that same move. It just
I was going to say, exactly. Payne's been trying to fight to get away for a while. It hasn't worked out so well for him over 6 years. So you have a long way to go to try and find that statute of limitations to get to wear off. But I know our listeners were clamoring to get you back on through the preseason podcast and stuff. And we told them, hey, look, we have to save John for the regular season. He's like a consummate veteran in a Sean McVay offense. He's not going to be bothered with preseason reps. He's saving it all for when the games mean the most.
100% right. Yeah, I barely looked at preseason. It's basically lost all relevance at this stage, hasn't it? So, excited to have the regular season back and looking forward to the year.
It's one of those markets that I think used to be an absolute goldmine. You saw some sharp money come in, and obviously some of the betting groups out there able to take advantage. But for a lot of our listeners, they shift their focus to the regular season. And before we get into some of the week one games themselves that I know Payne wants to ask about, what have you guys seen in the way of maybe division or overall futures liabilities? Are there certain teams you guys find yourselves rooting against early on in September, knowing this dynamic is going to change quite a bit once we start to get some real data points added into the equation?
Yeah, I think, the normal ones have definitely come back. The local teams, the Eagles, the Giants, the Jets even, given our predominantly East Coast footprint. I think they're the ones that we always see money for, and that they haven't let us down again this season. I think the one that surprised me most is the sheer demand for the Buffalo Bills. We're 12-1 right now. Pretty happy to lay bets at 12-1, but we have almost $3 million in liability already on the Buffalo Bills. And yeah, they had a good season last year. Obviously, the quarterback looks to be progressing rapidly, but pretty surprised about the sheer demand for Buffalo at this stage.
Payne, they're all drinking your Kool-Aid. They listen to this podcast and they're cheering on Brian Daboll as they want to try and go to the window and root for Josh Allen's continued maturation.
Brian Daboll is changing that organization. He changed Josh Allen. Now there's definitely, as John alluded to, a little bit more pressure. That price obviously isn't one that I would be willing to invest money at. And, we're looking at the week 1 price and we're seeing some money come in on Buffalo this week. It's up to 6.5. This was a game that was played in week 14. Pittsburgh opened a small favorite. Obviously, Buffalo closed a 2-point favorite, but a lot of adjustment in just a couple of games, as John alluded to. Lots of excitement for the Buffalo Bills.
John, when you kind of look at the board, we know you do your in-depth handicapping in terms of setting numbers and trying to identify what teams the market may or may not have overvalued and undervalued. Were there teams that you and the traders really said, hey, look, we're happy to try and create, a little bit higher than the market, forcing people's hands, or a little bit of a different approach that might be counterintuitive to some of the narratives the mainstream media is trying to cram down our throats?
Yeah, I mean, the top 4 in the market, the Chiefs, the Bucs, Bills, and the Packers are probably 4 that we're happy to be pretty aggressive against. We're looking for, big bets on them where we can get them, and we'll probably lay, over and above what we would normally do in relation to our limits on futures for those 4 teams. I think the next 2 are 2 that we're probably trying to keep a little bit for ourselves. Baltimore 14-1, and the Niners in particular at the same price, I think are 2 that, we would be less likely to try and attract support on. Of the bigger prices, I think probably New Orleans a little bit at 30-1. I know there's 40 or 50-1 out there about them. Still think that they're a talented group in particular. I think Jameis could be a really good fit for them. That is one of the most perplexing amount of times it's ever taken to make the most obvious decision as to who was going to be the quarterback for the New Orleans Saints this year. So they're probably the 3 that I would kind of offer up as us kind of trying to keep for ourselves. And yeah, pretty aggressive with the front of the market. We're happy at those odds to kind of attract as much money as we can.
Payne, it's always interesting. I mean, getting John's perspective on things, understanding, hey, look, you have to kind of shade teams accordingly, and hearing him talk as bullishly as he did about the 49ers, kind of music to my ears.
2 thumbs up on the 49ers. I think we're responsible for a little of that future money, both in the win totals market and in the futures market. John did mention Baltimore. That was a team that attracted us some, but the offseason has just been horrible. Lamar catches COVID again. Rashad Bateman, who is going to expand that offense, is out with a significant groin injury. You have J.K. Dobbins go down. The offensive line is still a little bit in flux. And so we really didn't end up attacking that team like we thought we would. So that's interesting on those 2 teams. But John's bang on. Those are the teams that I know wise guys were looking at.
John, before we give the floor to Payne and let him ask you the hard-hitting questions about this weekend and where you guys have seen money coming in, when you look at a slate like this, knowing that a lot of recreational bettors have kind of taken their money out of circulation since Super Bowl, they're now just getting back into the fold. How important is it for you guys to be able to get one of these 7-point favorites to win outright and blow up some of that money line and teaser liability when you look at hoping that the Lions, the Cowboys, maybe even the Browns to a lesser extent, but some of the dregs of the league, you need to go out there and perform at least in week 1 to help things out?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because we often have this debate internally around whether or not that's actually what we want. Is it net better for the recreational bettors who, as you say, have been away for football for 7 months almost at this stage? Is it better for them to actually, have a winning good experience in week 1, and does that engage them more over the rest of the season? And I probably lean that way, to be honest. You've heard me say it before. I genuinely don't want to see the bookmakers on the up every single week. I think if that was the case, no one would bet, right? So yeah, I mean, like we said last year, I think our job is to get the lines right, and the cards will fall as they will. And sure, it's nice when it's a meaningful upset, or if we were to get somebody like Houston to go ahead and record a lot of unexpected wins, then we'd be in a good spot, undoubtedly. But I think it's a little early for me to start bending over praying just now.
Payne, this is why our listeners love John. He is a man of the people. He's rooting for them to build their bankrolls aside from some of the best bet winners. But now you get to ask him the hard questions that I'm sure folks are waiting with bated breath to try and figure out exactly what sides they should be gravitating towards this weekend.
Extremely informative as well. And, when we look at week one, we know these lines have been out for months now. How have you seen the action kind of matriculate in? Did you guys take some decent money over the summer, or has it just all been the week of the game?
Yeah, I think a lot of it was delayed. We spoke about it last year with COVID. A lot of the money kind of held its position until closer to kickoff. I think less so this time. People are now used to the COVID world, and I think it's increasing their confidence earlier. That said, I think it was a little slow over the summer for sure. I think the way that the NBA played out meant that people were slow to move to football, but absolutely no doubt now that they're back in full force, and volumes are good so far. We've seen some interesting money. There's been some interesting line moves that I think you allude to since we opened up initially. So I think Seattle's a very, very interesting line. That line is kind of swayed both ways. I think the Colts opened up a point favourite when we opened it up. It went as high as Seattle -3, and then when Wentz and Nelson kind of trended back in after their injuries, it went towards Indy, and then we've seen some really sharp money and a real strong move back towards the Seahawks. Now I think we're -3, laid one of our sharpest customers -2.5 overnight. It was a game that we probably wanted to side with Seattle, and when we laid that money at 2.5, we were very quick to jump that to a field goal.
One of the more interesting games of the week, and Todd, we joked about this a little bit yesterday. It's like we all anticipated Carson Wentz being there. The market seemed to figure out he was in, but that line got to 3 yesterday. Then all of a sudden the Carson Wentz news came out, and a couple of sharp shops went down to 1, and it was like, we're really going to let these guys lay more Seattle -1? It felt very odd to me, but I think you're bang on. Even if Carson Wentz returns, we know new system, new guys around him. There's going to be an acclimation period that he just hasn't had to this point. When you talk about some of the other line moves, what have we seen so far in terms of sharp action?
New England -3 last night was one that kind of surprised us a little bit. Obviously, the unknown quantity in Mac Jones. Maybe it's an upgrade from Cam. It's definitely a downgrade in our ratings. I think he's probably going to work out pretty okay for the New England Patriots. I see him as somebody who'll manage the game and kind of do what he's told, and that may well suit the Belichick way in New England. We were pretty surprised that we had that under a field goal at 2.5. We laid -3 last night, -105. So I think we're -125 now on New England -3, and can't really see that moving back the other way. So if you do like New England, that would be one I would suggest taking sooner rather than later. I think our own opinion was on the Giants pretty aggressively. Pretty hard for us to out on ratings, with Denver being about a 4-point better team than the New York Giants, which the current line would allude to, maybe even a little more. We had that game more like Denver -1. I think Teddy's a good fit for Denver. I think he'll manage the game pretty well. We saw how good and effective he was in New Orleans around a good system, and I think he's got some good players on, particularly his offensive line, and some talent as well there to be able to work with. So that's one that we were aggressive. We were 2.5 last night. We were off market. I know we've moved back to 3 this morning, but I can see us being aggressive again with the Denver money and looking to attract money on them. In terms of smart money, the other one I guess was the Jags. We laid our sharpest customer -2.5, -112, and that was one that I would fully respect as well.
What's really interesting is that first game you mentioned with New England and Miami. Obviously, Miami had a little bit of some flux along their offensive line. Starting left tackle Austin Jackson looks like he is going to miss this game, but this line's been out again for 3 months, and this sharp customer didn't lay the 2 or 2.5. 3 is obviously a key number. Traditionally, how strong have you seen positions like this be when they're saying, hey, we're willing to lay 3? Obviously, limits did increase this week, but seems like a pretty strong position when you had the opportunity to lay 2 or 2.5 all summer, and you say, hey, I'm okay with laying 3.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's a Cam Newton thing. Obviously, we know that Cam's arm is highly questionable these days, despite his opinion that he's a top 5 quarterback. Or maybe he said top 10, actually. I'm being a little unfair. But yeah, I don't know whether they just feel that this fits the system better with Mac Jones, and whether or not they've been impressed and wanted to see some of him in preseason. And then obviously Belichick made the decision that he did to release Cam Newton. So yeah, like you say, a line that's moved and trended towards New England all summer, and now that sharp bet at a key number of 3 is, I think, pretty damning. Pretty surprising to me. I thought they were pretty weak last year, but obviously getting some of that defense that opted out back, although they lose Gilmore here, get Judon in as well. So yeah, I don't know whether they just feel like this is the perfect spot, as you said, with maybe Miami having some offensive line trouble as well.
The rumor is Mac Jones, substantially more efficient, knew the system better, was actually teaching Cam the system, if you can believe that. As we transition here a little bit, in terms of liability for the house, is there any major decision you're going to need? We've obviously Browns Chiefs is a big game. That total seems to keep trending upwards and upwards. It'll be interesting to see if it gets to the key number of 55, if there'll be resistance there. But any other games on the board where the house is going to have a rooting interest?
I mean, I think you've touched on them. A lot of teasers going through these obvious ones, and the first one being tonight, obviously, with Dallas. Everybody teasing Tampa Bay down to a point or so in that one, and we'll definitely pretty heavily need the Bucs there. We've seen an awful lot of interest, as I said, in Buffalo as well, and I think with everything that's going on in Pittsburgh, a lot of people weighing in on the Bills -6, and that's only trended one way as well. I find it hard to believe that it'll move anything towards Pittsburgh with all the uncertainty. I know Ben is saying he's as fit as he's ever been and as slim as he's been in 15 years. I'll believe that when I see it.
Feels like a relative slimness.
Yeah, it's like my slimness.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredible pain, too, because when you look at the way the board is, I mean, kind of going through, clearly everything I'd have to imagine from a teaser perspective ties into Sunday Night Football. John, I can't imagine your customer base is brimming with confidence going if they potentially have a rough Sunday that they want to try and use the Chicago Bears +7 as a live get-out game, having seen what we have from Chicago, at least last year, against this Rams defense.
Yeah, exactly. And now you've got the narrative in McVay's got Stafford in, and Stafford was always hampered by, weak goal lines and all the injuries and hits that he took and scrambling that he had to do. He's got a much more talented group in front of him in Los Angeles. And yeah, I think, like you say, I'll expect everybody to be rolling into the Rams, and that'll only be one decision for us.
That's the last game we have to preview before we close up shop today. But you have to remember, John, if you're going to try and talk with about Matt Stafford, you have to be very careful with slander, because I think Payne is the #1 fan in the Matt Stafford fan club. So we'll just have to get his take on his expectations for week 1. But John, can't thank you enough, not only for coming on today, but agreeing to join us every single Thursday throughout the course of the fall. I know our listeners are extremely excited to have you back in the mix as a part of the Bet the Board family. And we're curious to hear how week 1 goes on the professional football side now that we have college football already in the books.
Yeah, looking forward to it. Hopefully it's a good weekend, and like I said, hopefully the bettors get a few dollars to load up on week 2 on us.
Best of luck, my friend.
Thank you, guys.
Payne, it's always good when you get somebody like John to share a little bit of perspective from the other side of the counter. We missed his voice over the last 8-9 months.
Absolutely. It's great having John back. He is a wealth of knowledge, and it's always nice, right? Because when we sit here and break down these games, it's from one opinion. It's from one perspective. And so having John either confirm or give a different piece of information, I think, is very useful for the listeners.
I'm not going to lie. I was thrilled to hear him talk about his optimism for the San Francisco 49ers, obviously, given what we discussed on the preseason podcast. But I'm now especially curious to see more of the Baltimore Ravens, knowing that they were unwilling, I guess, and I don't want to put words in John's mouth, to take on some of the liability in terms of the future pool there. It's a team we were high on last year, but as you mentioned, not quite looking the same, at least heading into their week 1 showdown against the Raiders.
We were very interested in 14-1. And the reason it's still 14-1 is because we were no longer interested.
Would that be something you'd be interested in?
What was that Ramones script? Is that what it was? The Ramones script?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of. Yeah, exactly. I think that's exactly what it was from Little Entourage.
Yes.
So, yeah, I mean, we'll get a better indication. And, of course, for those folks who are curious to get our take on the Ravens season kickoff on Monday night against the Las Vegas Raiders, you'll have to tune in to the Monday podcast. But we do have one game left, Payne, and that, of course, is the Thursday Night Football Showdown, where the defending Super Bowl champs will be under the bright lights at Raymond James Stadium. And this number has ballooned, my friend. Opened this summer at 6 at FanDuel Sportsbook. We're now looking at a price tag of 8.5. The total, it's remained pretty steady, albeit with a little bit of movement. 51.5, the going rate at this point. When you look at Tampa, they're the first defending champion to return all 22 starters since the 1977 Raiders and the first team ever in the cap era. The Bucs quest to be the first repeat champion since the Pats in 2003-2004. Oh, by the way, the common denominator, of course, the man under center, Tom Brady. When you look at the way the Super Bowl champ has performed in this kickoff classic, a robust straight-up record, 13-3, and even very good against the spread, 11-4-1 against the number. Easy for me to say. Meanwhile, Tom Brady season openers, he's played in 18 of them, 14-4 straight up, but one game under 500 where it matters most. And of course, the season-long anomaly that we saw with the Bucs last year, they were 12-3 against the spread when they kicked off before 7 Eastern. They were 0-5 against the spread in prime time, maybe further proving what we already know to be true. Old people need to go to sleep a lot earlier than the youth in America.
Home teams in their opener on Thursday night have fared pretty well. Additionally, listen, when we're talking about the Bucs offense, you look at some of the names, and you have the greatest quarterback of all time in Brady, and there is just this ridiculous assortment of weapons, and you factor in a plus O-line. I think a lot of people just assumed they should have won the Super Bowl. Yeah, duh, no biggie. But for me, it was really interesting last year kind of watching the Bucs as the season went along. I mean, you have 11 to 15 new chess pieces all working together and trying to do it in unison in a shortened off season with new schemes and tendencies and philosophies and personalities. And so that was really impressive to me. And the team does have some characters on it.
Strong veteran leadership can mute the loud voices that characters bring into a clubhouse.
I like that. That was you have Chinese food last night on the fortune cookie?
I haven't had Chinese food in a while, I don't think.
Yeah, you're a health nut. That MSG will fuck up your head, Todd.
I can't handle the sodium, Payne. I can't handle the sodium.
So, as you watch them throughout the course of the season, there's some struggles along the way early on. And they're trying to do things that just kind of got thrown out the window a little bit. And all of a sudden, during that Week 13 bye, the Bucs offense was just fantastic. They were able to adjust. There was this meeting of the minds between quarterback and coach, and suddenly things started to get figured out. And to me, when you think about all of those things, I think there's probably a gear potentially that we haven't seen yet. And when you look at weighted offense, which puts more value on the most recent games, Tampa finished last season with the second most efficient weighted offense. The Week 13 bye was a savior. Tampa started taking a little bit of a different approach. They started, implementing things that Brady was more comfortable with, enhanced motion, right? Enhanced play action rates. And Brady surged from that point, finished number 1 in EPA per dropback from Tampa's bye week onwards. So when you look at it from that perspective, I think there is still some room to grow here for the offense. If Brady's guys, I think, are focused and they're not complacent, and to me, he is kind of the vibe of the entire team, and all of the quotes coming out of there is that they're ready. They want to make another run. I don't think if that's the case, Dan Quinn's defense is going to have much of a chance here. Obviously, a little bit of a scheme shift defensively. You're going away from a single high defensive look, which should absolutely improve things right off the bat, but it's not going to cure everything. And you're learning this new system that's probably going to take multiple weeks to get familiar with. And I'm also not a fan of Dan Quinn, which everyone knows. Just kind of living on reputation in the 2014 Super Bowl with one of the most talented defensive rosters over probably the last 2 decades, because Russ was on his rookie contract and, Seattle could just stack bodies. Dallas doesn't have that kind of defensive talent. And so, when you kind of look at his makeup, I don't know how you hire him, and maybe I am wrong. But, you've had 5+ seasons here of being a leading defensive mind for Atlanta and just never produced one season of above average efficiency. Not one. 2019, he fired himself as defensive coordinator 8 games into the season. And the guy who replaced him took the unit from 31st to 4th the remainder of the season after Dan Quinn fired himself in week 8.
I've tried to fire myself from this podcast. You still make me keep showing up to work.
And then all of a sudden, last year he was fired after 5 games, and the defense again improved once he left. Now, everything we've heard this week about Dan Quinn's plan, and I'm not sure why they're talking about it openly, but the players are basically saying, hey, we're going to try to get Tom Brady off the spot, make him throw off platform. Great plan. Easier said than done. And I'm not sure how they're going to do it because Dan Quinn isn't a guy that's shown that he wants to blitz a bunch. In 2018 and 19, Atlanta blitzed at below average league rates. Maybe he uses the new toy Micah Parsons. One of Parsons' best attributes is as a blitzer off the edge at linebacker. If you are looking at Brady metrics, I guess from last season pre-bye, I get the strategy, right? Completion percentage, yards per pass attempt, passer rating were all down substantially for Brady against the blitz, but historically, Tom's eating the blitz alive. He's just too savvy, right? He's too well studied. He can sniff it out pre-snap. If he's unsure of where pressure could be coming from, he signals for motion, which makes the defense show its hand. He'll slide a protection, and most of the time, Brady's beating your blitz before the ball's ever snapped. So I don't know if that's a philosophy that's going to work here. When you look at this number, and again, it's similar to the Rams game, is that, yes, Tampa is going to be the public side. But when we saw this line and it was, came out in May, and then there was a move about a month ago in August, like this line was Tampa minus 6.5. It's not the public taking it out to 8, 8.5, and 9. Okay, there's real professional money on Tampa here, and now that it's slid up, Tampa is now being included from professionals in teasers. And I know they're probably square teasers at this point as well as the public gets more ingrained in week 1 and starts getting their action down. But this is one of the sharper teasers, Buccaneers to Rams, and now we have seen books, Todd, kind of resort to using that 9.5 number in some locations as teaser protection.
Oh, you figured as soon as it got to 7.5 and there was going to be a limited appetite to try and value bet the underdog in the form of the Dallas Cowboys, that this number was going to continue to climb. And rightfully so, I think, not just because of what Tampa can do offensively against this Cowboys defense, but because of the question marks we have on the Cowboys offense that surround their starting quarterback, a man worth upwards of $150+ million in Dak Prescott, knowing that the Cowboys are down an offensive lineman in Zach Martin, and we still need to see Ezekiel Elliott regain some of the form that we saw in his first couple seasons, something not easy to do against the league's number 1 run defense over the last 2 years, anchored by defensive coordinator Todd Bowles.
All those things you mentioned is why there's going to be some variance for game 1 and probably some manual adjustments that need to be made. And Dallas's current day offense isn't what we saw from weeks 6 through 17 last year. Throw that data out. But it's also probably not the offense that was top 5 in yards per play and points per drive in games Dak started last season when he's coming off a gruesome leg injury and dealt with a shoulder strain, which limited most of camp. And you mentioned Zach Martin being out, and Lael Collins is battling this reoccurring neck stinger thing where if he takes one hit, he's out for the day. Now he's going to try to start, but those are some things that probably are going to have the Cowboys operating in this area of, you project them this week, maybe it's an above average offense. It's not anywhere near what they were when Dak was first healthy, the first few games last season. And I think with that variance comes the game plan as well. What's the Cowboys' game plan here? Is Dak going to be eased into the situation? And McCarthy's going to try to, rely on a healthy-ish O-line and what appears to be a really in-shape Zeke? I don't know if that's the right plan. That could be a mission in futility here, right? I mean, Tampa's been the most efficient run defense in the league back-to-back years. You would hope that McCarthy picks up where Dak left off, increase some pace, attack the Buccaneers where they're most vulnerable, and they're not super vulnerable there, but they're most vulnerable through the air. I just like the latter approach, right? If Dak is healthy enough to start, he's healthy enough to throw it 45, 48 times, right? Create more variance when you're an 8 or 9 point underdog. Use the best parts of your offense in Cooper, Lamb, and Gallup. And there is an area where Tampa has been susceptible, and it's defending the slot. Rumor is that CeeDee Lamb, might kick out a little bit more wide this season, but still, I think he's going to predominantly be in the slot. He ran 93.2% of his routes from the slot last year. We know Jordan Whitehead, the starting safety for Tampa, is out, so operating over the middle should be a little bit easier. Sean Murphy-Bunting, Tampa's slot corner, has not been great defending the slot. 58th in yards per coverage snap allowed among corners with at least 50 snaps in the slot last season. Allowed a 127 passer rating. More than 85% of targets were caught when defending the slot. So that'll be the matchup to watch here, is like, can CeeDee Lamb dominate the slot? If McCarthy's smart, Dak is going to pass early and often. Attack this specific area. But if Dallas doesn't come out throwing, what's going to end up happening is they're going to be in a situation where they're down 2 scores, and suddenly Dallas becomes this, 75, 80% pass offense, very predictable. And the Buccaneers are going to be able to get tee off on your quarterback that's coming back from injury. And Todd Bowles is going to fire up blitz in that situation. He loves blitzing. Top 5 blitz rate last year, one of the most blitz-heaviest defensive coordinators in the league. And then at that point, Dak's life becomes pretty miserable. So I think you kind of got to get out ahead of this a little bit. Start with a passing attack. Don't ease Dak into the game. Have him firing coming out. What is interesting, did see a little over money in the first half in this game, and it would potentially indicate that McCarthy may be smart and have Dak firing early.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about the total. I mean, I know the full game hasn't really moved a ton, and when you see numbers this large early on, it can leave you a little bit apprehensive if either team shows some rust, especially with some of the injury concerns around Dak. But I guess if you're the Tampa Bay Bucs, you feel that you can go out there and really attack this Cowboys offense. So going over a 25.5, like we've seen a trickle of money there, maybe not as big a deterrent as you would normally be led to believe.
The number they went over is a touch better than that. But yes, that first half over is sharp. Haven't bet it myself, but that would be the indication that Tampa's offense going against Dan Quinn is going to be pretty successful. We saw Godwin was also upgraded, which is a nice boost to that offense. Brady's been giving O.J. Howard rave reviews this offseason, so that's another weapon that's added to the fold. Like, just keep piling them on. And Dallas is hopefully going to come out of the gates a little bit fast, let Dak get acclimated to things, and really attack Tampa where they're most vulnerable. I just think running into a brick wall doesn't make much sense, but hey, we'll see what ultimately happens. There was potentially some weather concerns. I don't know if that's a thing at this point. I'm checking right now. It's a little bit of an overcast at this point tonight in Tampa. Calling right now, it looks like things are going to blow through. Only a 4% chance of rain. It looked like some rain might be imminent when we were looking at things on Monday and Tuesday, but seemed to be blowing over at this point at Raymond James.
All right, good deal. We don't want to see a game played in a quagmire to kick off the season. You'd like to see a little bit of fireworks, as there are a number of key personalities on both sides that I'm sure fantasy owners and bettors as well would like to see get off to pretty quick starts. Perfect time to remind all of you, our loyal listeners, to follow Payne on Twitter at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Furman. You can follow me there. Most importantly, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. Go over to FanDuel.com/BetTheBoard. Take advantage of all the aggressive sign-up bonuses that are there just in time for football season. You name it, FanDuel has it, not only for all of your NFL action, but college football, the U.S. Open, Major League Baseball. It's all there right at your fingertips. And Payne, I know you encourage people to go sign up for our football free roll that's available. And again, all that information on the Bet the Board podcast Twitter feed. But there is still one final order of business to transact. And again, special shout out to John Sheeran for joining us as he will every Thursday. But where are we going for the ceremonial Week 1 NFL Best Bet?
I've kind of talked myself in to 4-7-1 Cleveland Browns plus the 6. That's where we're heading. And if you're someone who is just fast forwarding to the best bet, we've broken this game in great detail for about 15 to 18 minutes. It'll be time-stamped. Go to it. But I think this is the right spot here for Cleveland. And I know some of the Mahomes numbers you mentioned early in the season are staggering, and Andy Reid's been fantastic out of the gate as well. But I think when we just break this game down as its own entity and look at both sides of the ball, in the matchup, in the schemes, and the styles, it really lends itself to the Browns having some success here, keeping it within this number. Let's go with the Browns +6.
Nothing that says bet the board DNA coming out firing week 1 on a team that hasn't won its season opener since 2004. I love it because, Payne, back in 2004, I think I was sitting on a beach somewhere in Sydney, Australia, enjoying my final semester as a college senior. So it harkens back to a simpler time in the day. This is where the Browns will go to end their week 1 misery.
How is the shrimp?
Shrimp was a little bit of a dicey proposition. The first time I went into a restaurant, realized they were delivered to my table with heads on them. Not quite the way that's prepared in U.S.-facing restaurants. So that was a little bit of culture shock, along with Australian beer. That stuff tastes like moonshine, my friend.
Hopefully we have prepared our listeners with a better best bet than your food options in Australia. Let's get out of Dodge.
My food options are always top shelf. How dare you try and pick apart the culinary creations that I choose to partake in. But want to wish all of you, our loyal Bet the Board listeners, the best of luck, not only this weekend with all of your wagers, but the full season. We can't remind you enough that it is a marathon, not a sprint. Keep those bankrolls intact. There are ebbs and flows. And at the end of the season, if you end up with more in your FanDuel account than you started, it's profitable. It doesn't matter how you got there. So first and foremost, with a Cleveland Browns ticket in hand come Sunday afternoon, we'll see you at the window.
Thanks for listening to Bet the Board. You can catch Todd and Payne every Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday during football season, breaking down the biggest NFL and college football games. And to make sure you don't miss any free best bets, subscribe to Bet the Board on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.